My name is Tony Armour. I am the Dallas Film Commissioner, and welcome to the Dallas Film Podcast. We're excited to have a great guest with us today, and we'll really get into everything that he does and that he's done so far. But I'm going to let Xalavier Nelson introduce himself.
Hey, folks. I'm Xalavier Nelson Jr. I am a game developer. I've worked on over 90 projects in the past 8 years and positions ranging from design to production to writing and beyond. I run a studio called Strange Scaffold out here in El Paso, Texas. We just released a game called El Paso Elsewhere. We have a very anticipated game called I'm Your Beast on the way. And yeah, you might know me from, again, having worked on so many things from Magic the Gathering to South Park Snow Day to Stranger Things VR and beyond, including things that if I talk about them too early, I will be shot in the street.
Well, good. Don't do that. No sense getting shot in the street. So actually, I have a quick question. So, because you said a junior, so your dad is also Xalavier Nelson. Is there an origin story to that particular name, or is just parents thought it was cool and that's what it is?
Honestly, we're thinking drugs. My grandparents were fun and interesting people. It was the 70s. Xalavier, we haven't been able to get a clear explanation from them in all of these years as to how or when that came around. So we quietly assume drugs and go, yeah, it must have just sounded wonderful, Auntie. That's great.
All right. Well, that's easy enough. So obviously you've got a very cool and interesting background. And as I was prepping for the podcast a little bit to chat with you here, obviously all video game focused, even though there's a movie angle that we can talk about a little bit later. But for our listeners or / viewers, if they're watching on YouTube, kind of give us your origin story.
Well, I'm a military brat. I was homeschooled, and at the age of 12, I learned that games journalists get games for free. And I said, that's objectively the perfect job. You get a free games, and you get paid for it, and all you have to do is write some stupid little article? That's amazing. So at the age of 12, I proposed to my parents. I was like, hey, I want to be a games journalist, and I want to start now. And homeschooling, the freedom that provides. My mom was like, I guess that's reading comprehension, corporate communication. Sure, go on, have at it. So at the age of 12, I pretended to be an adult, and I don't know what it says about the games industry that it worked, but I've been in the medium ever since, both on the journalism side and now on the creation side.
So did you just write like a cold email to a publication, whether it's digital or print or whatever else at the time, and just say, hey, I'm an up-and-coming journalist and I'd like to write for you. Here's a sample article. Or how did you, what was that pitch like to get started where you just you don't have to tell anybody your age, right? You're just, hey, here's who I am and what I do. So how did that get going?
I started with my own website. So I started a little WordPress blog, started to get some followers. I was like, hey, here's these reviews I do. The level of lack of knowledge that I had at the time was such that I didn't know that part of fair use is you can use images and video from the game for journalistic purposes and share that freely. I was afraid of me and my parents getting sued because I knew we couldn't afford that. So I would draw a representative screenshot of the game in MS Paint to promote the game and show the subject matter that we were doing. And then by at the apex of that first little independent site I had recruited my mother, who is a surrealist trained painter, as well as my little sister, to also be part of my burgeoning publication.
So they were creating cool graphics for you, at least for your website, which I think maybe gave you a little bit of a different look, because right, everybody else in the industry was probably just using screenshots or whatever from the games, and here you are creating custom artwork specifically, and it probably gave you okay, they must have some money behind this operation if they're creating custom artwork and everything else.
No. It very much looked like an MS Paint drawing of Orcs Must Die by a 12-year-old, but it was unique and different. And I think the only good art that came out of it. My sister had a couple of good pieces. I had maybe one good piece. My mom, of course, had the best pieces because she's a trained painter.
Yeah.
But I think the biggest thing that came out of that was I reviewed a laptop. I got sent a $2,500 laptop.
Nice.
And I had to sign a piece of paperwork, not legally binding because I was not a legal adult,
Right.
that said I would be responsible for the full price of the item if it got damaged. Again,
You had to send it back.
Family.
They send it to you and then you send it back.
Yes, and it has to be in perfect condition.
Right.
And enlisted military family, I'm holding this object like it's a precious jewel, trying to touch it as low as possible, run it through benchmarks and be like, okay, finished, done. Take that back today. I don't want that in the house. We cannot damage this laptop. I cannot be responsible for this. I'm 15 years old.
That's one of the most responsible 15-year-olds I've ever heard of.
It's that's the grace of God and real good parenting.
I was going to say, I think maybe that's that military family upbringing, right, where you knew right from wrong. You were taught that very early on, I'm sure, and gave you a baseline. We're like, don't screw this up.
Yeah, and I think that really transitioned into, especially when I started moving into management and direction positions. My dad, who ended up retiring as a non-commissioned NCO. Not commissioned NCO, as a non-commissioned officer, he always taught me that leadership was an act of service. It was a privilege, but also a responsibility. So when I started seeing the way that my industry, in terms of games, really irresponsibly treats resources and people, it is a industry of tyrants more often than servant leaders. I really took it as a personal need to explore other areas, other methods of creation to be responsible for people, be good to people so that you can make better games and take better care of your players.
What a novel idea to have good parenting that that creates good human beings who do good things for the world. Wow, I'm so surprised. Wow, amazing. I'm sure you've thanked your parents at this point now as you've grown older and be like, thank you for raising me the way that you did, because there were many other alternative paths you could have gone down.
Oh, absolutely. I think that there's something also very uniquely Texas in the sense that your process, it isn't just the work, it isn't just the result. It is your process that defines the final result. You can make all the money in the world, you can have all of the acclaim you want, but if your heart is not in the right place and if the way you treat people is not where it's supposed to be, sooner or later, the bill does come due. So there's this real strong foundation of it's not just what you do, it's how you do it.
Yeah.
Has transitioned into the way I lead teams, the way I train people now, and the way that I talk about the work that I do in games, as far as if we make more intentional decisions, we end up with stronger worlds, stronger stories even that we can bring to our audience and have them also react to and carry that legacy forward. Yeah,
it's really cool because it's not just essentially, great business perspective and a way of running a business, but it's turned into creatively making what you do better as well, because like you said, you're very intentional about the direction that you're taking with things and organized with how you want to make things happen and what the outcome will be.
Yeah, if you aren't intentional with your process, again, you can produce the most amazing thing in the world, but you have no ability to replicate it. It's like constantly making a cathedral and then dropping all your tools and going, oh no! The concept of blueprints is, especially in video games, not necessarily, despite there literally being a tool called blueprints inside of Unreal Engine 5, it's not very misunderstood or utilized. So really digging into what does it mean for me as an individual? How fast can I write a script? What conditions change how quickly I can write a script? How does my interaction with my family and my faith change how I react to a script and interact with my coworkers? All of it has led to a more holistic life philosophy of, if I have self-knowledge, it's my responsibility to use it and to give other people the tools to use that self-knowledge to better their processes as well. And considering the fact that in August we will have hit 15 games in 5 years, I think that overall philosophy and approach has really will really have paid off and has shown itself to pay off already.
Yeah, and that's really amazing. And especially you're still under 30 years old, correct? Because I saw you on a list 30 under 30 somewhere, or is that a year old? Now you've hit the magic number.
That's Forbes 30 under 30. I am 26 years old as of today.
Okay. Oh, happy birthday. You're joining us on your birthday on the podcast? Well, thank you.
No. I'm 26 years old as of this recording. I apologize. Turning 27 this year.
Okay. Gotcha. I thought you were saying as of today, you were turning.
It would have been a good way to use my birthday, and I would have done it regardless. I'm here for the Dallas Film Podcast.
Well, we appreciate that. I was going to say, man, he's recording our podcast, and he's going to the dentist on his birthday. Like, that is the most responsible human I've ever met. Well, and so you're 12, 15 years old. You're a journalist in the industry. How long were you basically running your own website before outside publications started reaching out to you, and you started freelancing or doing things for other entities?
I was going to leave the industry. So I was 15. I found my own personal faith with Jesus. I transitioned my website into kind of talking about an intersection of faith and video games. And that ended up also being able to make a bit of an impact at the time. And I was coming to 17, and the typical career length in games is 3 to 5 years.
Interesting.
Before someone is so burned out mentally or physically that they can no longer work.
Huh.
And so by the time going from 12 to 17, I'd seen 1 to 2 cycles of people, peers, mentors, people I looked up to, fall by the wayside, disappear off the map, just kind of cycle out of the industry entirely and no longer have an ability to have a voice in the medium. So I, as someone who already had found a vocation I loved, I was a children's librarian. I said, I'm going to put the world of games behind me, and I'm going to focus on this, and I will have the best job ever of being a librarian, because it is the best job ever, in my humble opinion. And I figured I'd make one game before I walked away. It was such a determination on my part that I had managed to pitch a talk to this conference called AltConf Paris. So I was going to give a talk in Paris about why I am leaving the games industry.
Okay, at 17 years old, you've had a career. 17. It's like it's time to retire at the ripe old age of 17.
Yeah, it all goes downhill from there. So I figured, quit while you're ahead. And I made one game. That game ended up being called All Hail the Spider God. It's available free to play online. And not only did people like it, but I also found that, again, that process, what it meant to create a video game, to write for a video game, was rejuvenating and something I couldn't just walk away from. So that talk about why I intended to leave the games industry was instead a talk about how the games industry treats people, and how I intended to, from a place of being ready to leave, wanted to repair things and change our relationship with creativity as much as possible while I'm here. And 8 years later, having worked on nearly 100 games from indie to AAA, all I can say is that pretty much every game that releases is a miracle, and that both game developers and game players deserve more sustainable production environments, because what we're doing is resulting in games that are not consistently fun, not consistently enjoyable, and that also have an uncertain factor of whether or not they'll even come into the public eye at all.
It's very interesting. They're very parallel to the independent film world and what it takes to get a film made, and people, writing screenplays, trying to get projects made, spending 20 years working on projects and them never happening. Why do you think it is that, to go back to 3 to 5 years, and people are leaving the industry? Why such a short time frame? People, obviously this is a mature industry. It's been around really now since the 70s, right? Starting with Pong and, progressing, from there. But why such a short amount of time?
I think that a big piece of it is, again, we do not have set processes. So in the film world, there's a lot of things you can do as a screenwriter. There's a lot of different avenues you can explore. You likely have a couple of scripts you're trying to make go along the way. The typical way of creation, even on, say, the indie side of games, is that you spend 3 to 5 years of your life, weirdly coincidental number, making one thing. Mm-hmm. And if that one thing does not make back all of the cash that's been invested into it within the first month of release, then your studio is dead and you have to start from the beginning.
Yeah.
And that kind of idea of hard crashes and lack of institutional knowledge means that people also don't carry forward the knowledge of mistakes. You have a small group of seniors who survive these projects and end up becoming the hardened veterans within less than a decade, really.
Yeah.
And they end up continuing to grow across projects where you have this army of juniors who come in, get burnt out by the industry, or maybe never find work again, and so get floated out to the degree that you don't have, say, a James Cameron who starts in SFX in VFX and then moves across these things. This idea of training under different environments. As games have gotten bigger, we now have regularly games that take 8 years to make.
Sure. Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it is interesting, and it's very parallel to the film industry. In the 20 plus years that I've been in the industry, the number of people, and it kind of goes in those waves and cycles like you're talking about. You see people that here's a 3 to 5 year group of people, and they're all doing the same thing, and then they kind of filter out, and kind of a new group floats in, and they're doing their thing, and then they're floating away, and because it's hard to get movies made, and where are you getting the money, and are you raising the money to do it? Are you making short films? Are you doing commercial work to kind of put all this together? And then, you do manage to raise money, and like you said, you don't get your investors your money back. And so they're not going to give you any more money for whatever the next thing you want to do is. So you got to try and find new investors, and it's hard. And so people just get out of it. So I do see a lot of parallels there, but I'm not familiar with, and I'm not sure how familiar our audience is with the independent game industry, right? So, people are like, okay, Madden and EA Sports new college game that's coming out, or, name the big, $60+ game that people have to pay for and buy, but there's
Call of Duty,
Call of Duty, yeah, all of that. There's a whole other world out there. Can you describe, without spending an hour just describing how the industry works, what that is like from the independent game maker side of things?
The problem that we're running into is that it used to look more different from each other. Again, much like film, where previously in the 90s, you had this culture where you would have James Cameron's Titanic, but you would also have Kevin Smith films, and they would both be doing really well in the box office and coexisting. In games, you would have people with 5-figure, even 4-figure, and low 6-figure budgets making these projects in a totally different way and coexisting alongside something like a Call of Duty, providing something different to the audience. But mirroring the escalation of Hollywood as it's gone into blockbusters all the time, games on the independent level, I've even just in my own personal time seen the average indie game budget go from $100,000 to $250,000 to $500,000 to $800,000 to $1 million plus in the past few years. So when everyone has to be making a project at $1 million plus, there's a much smaller range of projects you can make. There's a much more fear about getting back the return of investment. So the independent space doesn't work too different from the AAA space. You still have developers of different disciplines coming together to make a game and release it into the market, sometimes with a publisher, sometimes not. But the fact that they're now increasingly aiming towards the same targets and same players means that there's this red ocean of dead studios and dead games and of confused gamers saying, why is this all happening? Because compared to, say, the world of film, so much less is known about the world of game development.
Yeah. The more you talk, the more I realize how similar they are. But with a complete lack of, I'd say most people have a complete lack of knowledge based on how the film industry works, and so it's probably even a larger knowledge gap on how the game industry works as well. Yeah,
that part of it is because games mixes so many things together. If you're going to make a film, you say you're going to do a shootout in an alley. You get actors, you get costumes, you get props, you get blanks. You find an alley and you, with camera, shoot the film. In games, you have to invent the concept of a camera. What's a bullet? What is an alleyway? Is it brick? Is it asphalt? What happens when a bullet hits asphalt? What happens when a footprint hits asphalt?
Sure.
You're building a world from scratch. And so that involves so many different disciplines and so many different people with all these different levels of knowledge. I was a director of games before I learned what a collider is. For those who aren't familiar, a collider is whenever you walk your character into a wall and they stop at that wall, you can thank a collider for it. It is a colliding object in the game simulation universe that determines how things work with it. I had never worked with colliders because I was mainly from the writing and narrative side of the house. So when I finally got into that position, I was directing games, and I was like, "Oh, what is a skinned mesh? What does it mean for something to be ambiently occluded? And how do you build that type of system, and how does that impact the aesthetic of your game?" There's so much to know that it's very hard for someone to keep it all in their heads, and it's often not relevant. And so if even people inside the industry don't know each other's jobs, right, imagine how much knowledge the average gamer has, even if they're really invested in the creative process. And that's why part of what we do at Strange Scaffold is talk about how you build games as well, to share that knowledge with the world.
Yeah, it's very interesting. It's like people who love movies and love watching movies, but they have no idea what it takes to make a movie, same kind of thing. But Texas, actually, I've been in Dallas as the film commissioner here for about a year and a half now, and I didn't know before I got here what a huge video game industry there is within the state of Texas. So Dallas, there are companies like Gearbox and some others, some big ones that are around this area, but then spread out through the entire state. And the state as a whole is doing what it can to support that industry. Do you think it made a difference growing up or being here, in your youth in Texas as opposed to somewhere else for you really taking off in the industry, or is this something you could have done from anywhere?
Well, to be completely honest, I've been in El Paso for the past 6 years, but outside of then, I haven't really spent much time in Texas. Military brat, so we were bouncing all over the place. I never had the ability to live in an industry hub, and that's where I would give a lot of encouragement to people is, say you're in a small town in Texas and you say, man, I can't get out to Dallas and get a job with Gearbox, or how am I supposed to exist? As long as you can get a plane ticket, a lot of the primary networking and community events of games are actually pretty highly accessible to you. So being a military kid in Italy, which is where a lot of my professional career started to take off in terms of both journalism and game development, I would hop on a $50 plane ticket to London to be in London for a day and give a talk. And then I would be on the flight at 3 a.m. the next morning, just kind of Iron Man it through the night to get back home.
EasyJet or Ryanair, one of those
EasyJet.
EasyJet. I've bounced around Europe on EasyJet quite a bit myself, because people don't realize it's super cheap. It is $50 just to get a flight. And you're like, $50? Are you serious? I can go here to here for $50?
Now you do pay for that in other ways.
You do,
yeah. Ryanair, EasyJet, those sorts of equivalents. I really was able to have my own practice at home remotely while also finding times to meet the local industry. And I'd say one thing that's come as a result of COVID is more remote opportunities than ever.
Yeah.
And for pretty much any remote opportunity you see, they'll say you can only be working from Texas, California, a few different places. So Texas is a place where you can make it your home, maybe not even ever travel out to a place like a California, and have a good life.
Yeah, that's awesome. Is there, for maybe kids that are starting out and they're wanting to design video games, obviously there are a lot of college opportunities. You can literally go to college now and learn how to make video games. I'm sure there are tons of online resources. Everybody's favorite online resource, YouTube. If you can fix your washing machine, you can learn how to design video games on YouTube as well. And so I'm assuming that there are kids out there who are making their own games. They're getting the software and just kind of figuring out, and whether they're, lower echelon type things, they're not full sandbox type worlds. But do you see that very often? Is that a good way for maybe somebody starting out to kind of dabble? Because again, if you're not worried about paying a team and you're just sitting there and, playing an Unreal Engine, doing it yourself, are you seeing some of that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's part of a big reason that we now have the democratized game development that we do. Unity is free. Unreal Engine is free. Unreal Engine every month gives you, it doesn't just have a permanently free collection of assets, it also every month will pay creators inside of its asset store to set their assets for free. So you'll get another, like a package of assets worth roughly $500 every month is just being given out. So if you want to be making a video game, the only thing that's standing in your way at this point is your own will and ability to sort of plug away at it and make something that's like small and effective and really punches above its weight, like an independent film. And I think one of the best things I can say, and one of the differences between games and film, is the avenues of distribution are so much more democratized.
Yeah.
So if you want to be on Steam next to Grand Theft Auto 5, it's $100, a flat fee. You can be distributing your game. It's unlikely you'll sell as many copies as Grand Theft Auto. But the fact that you get to be there at all and that power is in your hands is not, there's no equivalent for it in any other industry, from literature to music.
Yeah, no, there really isn't. Yeah, it's really interesting because you like, the democratization is the perfect word for it. You know, the same thing has happened in the film industry. It's become much easier. You can shoot a feature film on your iPhone if you want, or your whatever Android phone. It doesn't matter. You know, you can just go do it. It's not going to look like, you know, Blade Runner 2049 or something like that. But you
can take advantage of that.
But you can take advantage of that. It's a film studio in your pocket. As a kid who grew up in the 80s, you know, I shot my first films on Super 8 film, which was fun and an amazing way to start to shoot on that format. But it's hard to, you know, translate that into sort of a feature kind of thing. And so there's so many things that have changed like that, and it's hard, you know, to get your movie out to the world. You could put it on a Vimeo or a YouTube or something like that, but it's not the same as, you know, putting a video game on Steam and people being able to see it on there, because it's not a Netflix or an Amazon or something like that. But you're right alongside all the other big games just like that. That's very cool.
Yeah, it is. I don't blame anyone, because it is complicated. It is hard, but if you want to make a living from being creative, that's always going to be hard. So I share the tools and I let people do what they will with them, because they are freely and openly available. And if you aren't working in games right now, that's up to you.
Yeah. And how smart of Unreal and Unity to just give their stuff away free. You know, there are other companies who would put a paywall there that would make it really difficult and, you know, try and generate a ton of revenue. But they were smart enough to know that the more people they get involved making this, just the more accessibility there is, the more that their business is going to grow too.
Yeah. And you can absolutely see. So Unreal, unless you make $1 million within 12 months, you pay nothing for it. Yeah. At which point you give them a small cut. And every game made with Unreal that's making that type of cash, they can afford to.
They're happy to, right? They're like, I got all this for free. It made $1 million. Sure, here's your piece. Absolutely, yeah. So that's such a great way to do it. And Unreal and Unity are being used a lot in the film production world in LED volumes and stuff now too. So now we're seeing these two worlds collide and sort of mesh in what is happening with, you know, with video games and with, you know, with film and television. I think Mandalorian is the one where it wasn't necessarily the first one, but it's the first one where people realized that these worlds were coming together when Lucasfilm started putting out the behind the scenes of, you know, the work of the volume and everything. I remember when I first saw it, I was like, what are you doing this? This is amazing. It was just...
And the transformation between that and... I grew up watching bonus features on DVD.
Yeah, of course.
Like green screen and the evolution of green screen, and now having actors literally walking through spaces and how that becomes equivalent to games, and where that really breaks down when you see it as too equivalent and then suddenly those worlds aren't meshing. It's just a fascinating exploratory space where people have the ability to make a mark, do their own thing, really explore this territory for themselves, which is why I encourage people to, right where you are with whatever you have. If what you've got is $5, guess what? You can make a video game and you can distribute it to the entire world through a storefront like itch.io. I believe Epic is now free as well. Epic, who distributes Fortnite and Unreal Engine. So the paths are open. It's just up to you to use them and to talk to people and to find your audience.
That's awesome. So you have a game that you designed, that you worked on, that came out in 2023 that took off, became very popular, and has now been optioned to be turned into a film. Why don't you talk a little bit about that?
So El Paso Elsewhere is a supernatural throwback third-person shooter, kind of like Max Payne or Dead to Rights for those who remember that, about a black monster hunter going into a haunted motel in the middle of El Paso, Texas, to destroy the monster he loved before she ends the world. He processes his pain and trauma along the way from being in that abusive relationship, because it turns out being with the Lord of the Vampires will mess you up a little bit. And what that culminates in is this very breathless neo-noir slow motion dodging around corners, shooting werewolves in the face with shotguns style experience. And it really took off, and we got nominated for a lot of awards next to games that had much more marketing and budget power than we did. And finally, both our amazing agents over at CAA, as well as Dee Bonaventura and Lakeith Stanfield, they said that this really has potential. And now the game is, it hasn't been optioned for a film. It's a film development deal. So we're now moving forward and seeing this thing come to life. And we're really excited to watch that process continue. That's awesome.
Yeah, development is much different from optioning. So that's very cool to see that you've hit that point. So when you released this game, this was something that you created under your company. You said 15 games in 5 years, right?
Yes. In August, we'll have hit our 15th game. Today, we're releasing, as of this recording, we're releasing our 14th game. It's called Clickholding.
Amazing. So you're doing 3 games a year on average, essentially. And you released this one. How do you do that? So you've created this game, 2023. What platforms are you putting this out there for people to find?
We put it. The initial release was on Steam and on Xbox. Mm-hmm. We got a lot of support from the folks over at Microsoft. They really believed in the game and in the vision of it. They put it on the dashboard, so when you logged into your Xbox, you saw El Paso elsewhere. From there, we are now putting it on mobile phones this fall, as well as on PS5. It'll have a physical edition. It'll have a poster in it and everything. And yeah, so the game kind of started on PC and Xbox and exploded from there.
That's amazing. And so now, even though I'm outgoing as the Dallas Film Commissioner, part of my job is still going to be to try and bring production to Dallas, because the new company I'm working for, we have some sound stages that we're developing and building out in Dallas here that'll be done by November. What about shooting this thing in Dallas? Where are you going to shoot this at? You got to keep it in Texas, right?
I would love to see it kept in Texas. There's a lot of partners and interests to juggle, but hey, if Dallas Film Commission reaches out and is interested, we would love to see. We'd really love to see a public display of just how much Texas inspires in terms of its art, in terms of what can be done here.
Well, offline, let's have that conversation. I'm going to be in LA in August. If there's anybody I need to meet with out there, let's put it together and we'll see what we can do to get this. Trust me, I know there's a lot of factors that weigh into it. Tax incentives are always the biggest one, which Texas does have money to spend on incentives right now, $200 million that is available for film and television production. So it's worth a conversation. Why not see if we can figure it out? And I think it'd be a great thing for this game that was created here and created with the name El Paso in it. I'm sure Drew, who is the El Paso Film Commissioner, would prefer that it shoots in El Paso, but I'm gonna lobby for Dallas to get this thing done.
The important thing to me is really just that, people see El Paso and Texas in this similar burgeoning creative light. I think one of the reasons we deal with the quote unquote brain drain in a place like Texas is that they say, to really have a career, I need to go to Atlanta. To really be legitimate, I need to go to New York or California. And particularly where games are concerned. Yeah. You can be anywhere. Some of the people I know who have been most successful in games, they've worked from Ohio. They've been in Minnesota. They've been just kind of wherever they were, they reached out and found their audience. And I want people to, for my little slice of Texas, for example, El Paso, just realize it as a deep and burgeoning foundation for not just a place you can build things, but also a place where you will be creative. Yeah, and I love that. Dallas is one of those places too.
It is, and I grew up in Toledo, Ohio, and I had to move away from there because it's a blue collar auto industry town, and that wasn't what I wanted to do career wise. But that's changed, right? You could be in Toledo, you could be in El Paso, and honestly, for Dallas, the number of people who reach out to me in the last year and a half said, hey, I just moved to Dallas from LA, from New York, from Atlanta, wherever else. What's happening here? How can I get involved? What can I do? And there's a huge influx of people in the industry, entertainment, video game, everything else, coming to Dallas. And there are a lot of reasons for that. One, it's a big city. It's there's a lot to do. I think sports play a big part of it in that it's such a brand that's recognized globally because of that. But you've also got a lot of money in the area, and it's become a huge financial hub, and businesses are growing, and so it's become this economic center. When I first took the job here, people were like, "Oh, you're going to buy cowboy boots and a hat?" I'm like, that is not Dallas. Dallas is a city. Dallas is like very business oriented. And so I think that's why you're seeing a lot of people come to not just Dallas, but Texas in general, because there's such a positive business environment here that are bringing things that are not just business, but can be creative, right? Creative film industry and video games. So it's really cool to see that you really can do this anywhere. And I think the state is starting to put money behind it, and hopefully we'll start putting more incentives behind this because there is an incentive to make video games in the state as well. Are you taking advantage of any of those state incentives that they're offering for video game creation for your company?
Not quite yet. There's some interesting limitations to the thing that to the incentives that make it to where, even say, though I'm based in El Paso, for example, the fact that most of my team is also remote because I want to provide similar opportunities to other people. Suddenly those don't work for us, or there's a piece of the incentive that says you must already be funded for a project and have created no materials for it before it receives potential support from the state.
Right.
In games, you have to usually build a full prototype or vertical slice, then that to get funding, at which point you're no longer eligible. So it's weird, but there's one of the reasons I'm also very active in talking to creators in and around Texas and supporting Texas incentive programs and really looking into them and advocating for them is because there's so many developers here and so many people who would be developers finding ways to get that support out and to really have this industry be visibly thriving on the indie and the AAA sector. All it does is just get the snowball rolling faster down the mountain, and it's already rolling pretty dang fast.
Yeah. So I wanted to switch gears a little bit and ask you a little bit about early on in the conversation. We talked about sort of your upbringing and how that influenced just kind of how you approach life and running your business and people and making video games. Not that it's not professional, but a sustainable, professional, good environment for people to work in, and how you had found faith and how that really factored into it. Can you talk about that a little bit, about what that was like, what that sort of change was like in your life, and how that has impacted what you do and your goals moving forward?
The faith bit? Yeah. I mean,
if you don't mind.
Oh, I don't mind at all. I love it. I don't get many opportunities to talk about it. So
I'm just curious because it's not something that we hear very often in a lot of the creative world, I think video games or film. And it's your story. And so I think it'd be great for people to hear it.
I appreciate it. I was raised Christian, and like a lot of people who are raised Christian, a lot of the elements of say it's storytelling, what it means to be a Christian, what it means to believe in Jesus, who Jesus is, were something I took for granted. They were not transformative to me. They were kind of like just the symbols on the wall, and that's it. And if I continued going down that path, I probably would have drifted away from the faith because it wasn't, for lack of a better term, interesting. There's a lot of ways that faith, even say in early stages in the church, say Sunday school, it gets sanitized to Noah and the ark and Jesus loves you.
Yes.
And all of these other fascinating pieces of history, philosophy, literature, and language, all of it gets lost in the idea of making it as accessible and friendly as possible with something like, say, a VeggieTales. So I say this as someone who loves VeggieTales, but if what you're mainly raised with is VeggieTales, you will see it as something to grow out of. So as I was hitting my teenage stage, my family had a Bible. I just happened to pick it up and be like, no, I'm just going to read this at some point. I'm getting tired of video games and the world of video games already. I was a very weary 15-year-old, and I said, there's got to be something more to this. And reading the Bible for the first time myself, not as a thing I'm supposed to do as a chore, but
Right.
as a book, seeing what it means and what it would mean for it to be the Word of God. Um, I realized, like, wait, a lot of things I've seen in video games, a lot of pieces of language and story is related to this thing from thousands of years. This is still relevant today. And that kicked off what became a journey of like me having a personal relationship with Jesus and looking for, as a creative, breaking outside of the very sometimes binary perspective of what it means to make a game that discusses faith and religion and creativity. One of my first games I directed was called Can Androids Pray, and it's a 15-minute cinematic choice-based video game about two mech pilots on the ruined husk of what used to be Earth, who have been, their mechs have been destroyed, and when the sun rises in the morning, they're going to die. And they have a conversation about being at the end of the world and about their relationship with God.
Oh, very
and
cool.
The idea that even say in El Paso elsewhere, you can see that this man has a relationship with faith. How does that impact his story? How does that elevate sort of the surreal tones and what this character is thinking as he walks through the world? Thinking about faith as a holistic thing. It's not limited to church on Sunday, but it is a piece that can and should impact your entire life, and therefore can and should impact your stories in ways big and small. It's something that has become a big piece of my overall creative approach and the universes that I build. And it's also something that has given me a huge degree of freedom, because when you do live a segmented life where it's church on Sunday and everything else, or here's how you treat people when they're Christian versus when they're a coworker, of course it feels more arbitrary. Of course it feels forced. And I've been very fortunate. I thank God that I've been freed of a lot of that foundation that I was raised with, not intentionally by my parents, but just by like culture that here's how you segment a life and a person. Turns out that that this conception of what faith is and is supposed to be can be questioned, should be questioned. And I've applied that questioning perspective to things, including how do we make a video game? Can it be made better, faster, cheaper, and healthier than the industry assumes is possible? Turns out the answer is yes.
That's very cool. And I'm assuming that this is very unique within the industry, and you're not seeing this a lot, especially how you're incorporating characters' faith within the games themselves.
We are exploring more territory in general in the games, but I can say even one of the more major games publishers, they were reaching out to us to work with because we're a very visible voice inside the space at this point. And one of the things they told us was, hey, by the way, our label, we don't sign any games that incorporate active discussion of religion or faith. And I was like, oh, that might be a bit of a problem, because a lot of our games are not explicitly religious games, but like we are people of multiple backgrounds, religious and gender and sexual identities making a video game. If you're going to cut off a whole leg or arm of that, you're going to get less of us, and our players are going to get less of what they've been buying from us already. Don't know if that's going to work. So it is fairly atypical. We're not the only ones, though, and I think that that's the thing I try to focus on myself is the longer I do this, the more I realize, oh, for example, I didn't grow up seeing a lot of black game developers. Turns out we are only 2% of the industry, but there's been people making games and making a significant impact on games. One of the first developers of Madden was a black man named Gordon Bellamy. I am fortunate to be friends with him today. The creator of Bit Summit, the big Japanese game show, the big Japanese game showcase, that's a black guy named John Davis, I believe. So, and of course, the very first cartridge-based game console called the Fairchild Channel F, a man named Jerry Lawson. Black as hell name. He was the inventor of the cartridge that came to be used in the NES and so on and so forth. So we are a part of this industry. We have been a part of this industry. Christians have also been a part of this industry for quite some time, and I try to focus on telling people, hey, we've been around, and you're welcome to join us, especially if you're going to make some cool, creative, deeply interesting and weird things.
Yeah, and I think that's the cool thing too is, you're just making great games that people want to play and that people are attracted to, and it just so happens that you're using elements of your faith to help you in the design and approach and the process to it, and then there might be some elements, again, like you said, nothing's overtly religious within the games, but the character is a person of faith within the game kind of thing. And so using those elements, and kind of in the film world, they're called like faith adjacent. You make films that are sort of faith-based, but they're not really, they're faith adjacent kind of thing. It's almost like faith adjacent video games where there's these elements there. And as long as people are enjoying them, and the whole point of making a video game is you want people to play it and do it, then it shouldn't matter what those beliefs are that are going into it.
Yeah, and that's why I don't say that I make Christian games per se. I'm a Christian who makes games.
Exactly.
And if you're telling those stories just as like anyone else from any other perspective would draw on all parts of their personal history and creative perspective, then you're going to be able to make a lot of interesting things. I think one of the things for our release today, at one point when I was a teenager, I was briefly locked in an attic with a neo-Nazi and had to talk my way out. So that's a piece of this game. That idea of building this kind of uncomfortable relationship with someone who you don't know who they are, and if you want to get close to them, but you nonetheless need to build some sort of relationship to escape this situation and figure out who you are in the process. My faith is, it's a weird comparison, but my faith is yet another piece of my toolbox and of my essential creative perspective that I use to really attempt to reach humans around the world and wherever they are too. So sometimes it's overtly religious, sometimes it's not, but regardless, I think the reason that it's kind of landed with as many people as it has is because we're focusing on delivering a really compelling game and a really a story that you find irresistible regardless of what your background is.
That's amazing. Well, I know we're running out of time here, so I just want to say thank you again for joining us on the Dallas Film Podcast. Anything you'd like to pitch before we wrap up? Your new game? Anything coming out soon?
Film something in Dallas. Film something in El Paso. These are creative hubs. You can do it. Outside of that, I would say, feel free to follow Strange Scaffold. We got 2 more releases coming out this year. Click Holding today, as well as I'm Your Beast this fall. El Paso also is coming to phones and to PlayStation 5. Keep an eye out because we continue to, with every release, bring something new and unexpected into the world, and we aren't stopping anytime soon.
That's awesome. So Austin is going to get with you, and he'll get you the information about when this podcast episode is going to air, and we'll put all the show notes for everybody that's listening. All the show notes will go in the listing on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and YouTube as well. So again, thanks everybody for listening, and I keep saying this every episode. I need to come up with like a closing tagline. I don't have a closing tagline yet. So if you got any suggestions for me, otherwise I'm going to say tune in next week, which is a very old school thing to say as if you're listening to a radio program, but I'm going to say it anyways because I guess I'm an old school guy. So thanks for listening.
Tune in next week.
Tune in next week.